The morning that changed everything, Sundar woke up to the soft light of dawn streaming through the curtains. The city outside was still quiet, the hum of early traffic far away, and the occasional chirping of birds created a fragile melody that seemed to promise a new beginning. He sat on the edge of his bed, his hands folded, and for a few moments he allowed himself to just breathe. The night had been restless. Dreams of the past, of struggles long buried, had crept in, reminding him of every small moment that had led him here. He thought of his childhood in Chennai, the small apartment with a leaking roof, the nights when he would study under the dim light of a single lamp, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He remembered his father's words spoken softly but firmly. "Hard work and respect, Sundar, that is what will carry you through life." Those words had been a beacon, a quiet light guiding him through uncertainty, and even now, decades later, they resonated with him in ways he could not fully explain. He rose and walked to the window, looking out over the city. It seemed peaceful, yet he knew beneath that calm surface life never really paused. There were always decisions to be made, responsibilities to carry, and expectations from people he barely knew. Today, however, was different. Today was not just any day. Today, his young son, Aaron, was going to meet someone who had shaped the country's destiny in ways Sundar had only read about in history books. Someone whom Aaron had been learning about with innocent curiosity and unwavering respect. The thought of watching his son in that moment filled Sundar with a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. He knew children could surprise you, but he also knew that respect, genuine respect, could move hearts in ways even the most powerful speeches could not. He wondered quietly if Aaron understood the gravity of what he was about to do, and if he did, how it would shape the memory of his young mind forever. The morning moved forward slowly, almost ceremoniously. Sundar dressed in simple clothes, avoiding anything flashy, his mind racing with 1,000 tiny worries. He wondered if he had explained everything clearly to Aaron the night before, if he had instilled the right mindset, the right humility. He remembered sitting on the floor with Arun, showing him photographs, videos, and stories, trying to make the lessons meaningful, trying to explain that respect was not about fear or submission, but about understanding the value of another person's journey. "Remember, Arun," he had said, "a salute is not just a gesture, it is a feeling. It comes from your heart." Arun had looked at him seriously, nodding, and Sundar had seen in his eyes a spark, a combination of curiosity, pride, and a quiet determination that made Sundar's heart swell. As they drove toward the event, Sundar noticed how Arun pressed his small hands against the window, eyes wide, drinking in everything he saw. The streets were beginning to bustle, but Arun seemed absorbed in a world of his own, perhaps imagining stories of courage and leadership. Sundar thought about the journey that had brought him here, not just his own but Aaron's. He thought about the sacrifices, the late nights studying computer programs, the endless challenges faced in a foreign country, the doubts whispered by colleagues and competitors alike. And yet, here he was, a man who had always valued humility above everything, preparing to witness a moment that could touch countless hearts across the nation through the innocence of his son. The hall was already filling with people when they arrived, the air buzzing with anticipation. Sundar held Arun's hand tightly as they walked in, trying to shield him from the noise. The strangers, the cameras, the whispers that carried more excitement than they ever had before. He noticed Arun's small fingers gripping his with strength that belied his age. Sundar smiled quietly, thinking about how children sometimes carry burdens they do not fully understand, yet they can also teach adults about courage, about presence, about living in a moment completely. And then, as if time slowed, the man everyone had been waiting for entered. Modiji's presence filled the room in a way that words could never capture. There was a gravity in his steps, a quiet command, a sense of history that pressed lightly on every shoulder in the room. Sundar felt a shiver run down his spine, not from fear but from the weight of witnessing something larger than life, something that would linger in memory long after the event ended. Arun, sensing the importance of the moment, straightened his back. His small hand went up in a salute, not stiffly, not awkwardly, but with an honesty and simplicity that seemed to light up the space around him. Sundar felt his chest tighten, a mix of pride and emotion that he could barely hold in. In that instant, he remembered his father's lessons again: respect, humility, kindness. And yet what happened next surprised everyone, including Sundar. Modi Ji's eyes softened, a smile creasing his face, and he leaned slightly toward Arun. The room, filled with murmurs and the flash of cameras, seemed to pause for just a heartbeat. The gesture that followed was so unexpected, so human, so profoundly touching that Sundar felt tears prick his eyes. But before Sundar could fully process what had just happened, a sudden commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. People whispered urgently, the calm of the hall shattered by the unexpected. Sundar's mind raced. What could this be? Why now? And most importantly, what would happen next? The feeling in the room shifted from awe and admiration to a tense uncertainty that made hearts beat faster. Sundar looked down at Arun, whose small hand still lingered near his chest from the salute, and saw a flicker of confusion and fear. The moment that had just touched the soul of everyone present was now at risk of being overshadowed by something entirely unplanned. The security moved quickly, yet there was no clear explanation. Murmurs turned into whispered questions into urgent exclamations. Sundar's heart pounded. He felt a wave of helplessness, a rare feeling in his life creeping over him, yet deep inside, a part of him knew that this was not just chaos. This was the beginning of something important, something that would test every value he had ever held dear: respect, humility, resilience, kindness. The room felt charged with expectation, and Sundar understood even before words were spoken that the moments to follow could define not just the event, but the memory that would stay with Arun for the rest of his life. And then, just as Sundar opened his mouth to move toward Arun, a voice echoed across the hall, calm yet powerful, and the world seemed to freeze around them. It was a voice that promised answers yet hinted at challenges, a voice that would carry lessons far beyond that room. Sundar turned toward the sound, heart racing, not knowing if it would bring relief or another layer of uncertainty. The next few minutes, he realized, would reveal truths that no preparation could have anticipated, truths that would leave an indelible mark on him, on Arun, and on everyone who witnessed it. As the camera flashed, capturing the scene that would later appear on countless screens across the country, Sundar's mind raced. He knew this was a moment that could either become a fleeting memory or a lasting story of courage, humility, and unexpected connection. He felt Arun's small hand tighten around his, a silent message of trust, and Sundar whispered under his breath, almost to himself, almost to fate itself, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And then, just as the hall seemed to settle, the doors opened once more, revealing a figure that nobody had expected. The room fell into a stunned silence. Sundar felt his heart skip a beat. This was no ordinary interruption. This was a moment that would change everything. The unexpected guest. The doors opened slowly, and for a moment the entire hall seemed suspended in silence, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Sundar's heart raced, every muscle in his body tense, trying to anticipate what was about to unfold. At first he could only see a shadow, a shape that did not belong to anyone expected at the event. People shifted nervously in their seats, whispers filling the air, but no one dared speak. Arun clutched his father's hand tighter, his small body pressing closer as though instinctively seeking protection from the unknown. Sundar felt a surge of responsibility, that familiar, heavy weight of leadership that he had carried his entire life. But this time, it was not about business or technology. It was about the safety and understanding of his own child, and about making sense of something that was profoundly human, and yet completely unexpected. And then, as the figure stepped into the light, the room gasped. It was an elderly man dressed in traditional attire, his eyes deep and searching, carrying with him a presence that was both humble and commanding. He moved slowly, almost reverently, toward the stage, yet there was no official introduction, no formal announcement. Sundar's mind raced, trying to place the man, but something about his demeanor suggested he was not there to seek attention, nor to disrupt the event. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, a sense that he had come with a purpose that only a few could understand. People's faces reflected confusion, curiosity, and in some cases disbelief, and Sundar felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He glanced down at Aaron, whose eyes were wide, brimming with innocent wonder, and he realized that this was a lesson unlike any he had prepared for. This was a lesson that could not be explained with words or stories. It had to be experienced, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on him. As the man approached, Modi Ji stood, his expression composed, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that this visitor carried significance beyond appearances. Sundar could feel the tension in the room, the collective anticipation that made the air feel thick, almost tangible. And then, the man stopped just a few feet from Aaron, his gaze settling gently on the boy. There was no intimidation, no demand for attention, only a quiet focus that seemed to pierce through the ordinary distractions of the room. Sundar felt his heart tighten, unsure whether to move forward, to shield his son, or to trust that something meaningful was unfolding before him. Arun, however, did not flinch. He mirrored his father's steadiness, but in his eyes, Sundar saw curiosity, a raw intelligence, and a subtle courage that made Sundar's chest swell with pride. The man knelt, slowly, bringing himself closer to Aaron's eye level. The gesture was simple, almost tender, yet it carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. The room seemed to lean in, every person caught in the fragile silence that now enveloped them. Sundar could feel the collective breath of the audience, held in anticipation, waiting for a sign, a word, anything that would break the suspense. And then, in a voice that was soft but carried remarkable clarity, the man spoke directly to Arun. Sundar could not hear all the words over the thrum of his own heartbeat, but he saw the effect immediately. Aaron's small hands unclenched, his posture relaxed, and a faint smile broke across his face. The boy nodded slowly, as if in understanding, as if a secret had been passed, a secret that only the two of them shared. Sundar's eyes filled with emotion, the kind that comes from witnessing the invisible connections of life, the ones that cannot be explained or forced, only felt. But before Sundar could process this moment fully, a sudden, sharp noise from the back of the hall shattered the fragile calm. It sounded like a door slamming, but it carried with it the echo of panic, the undertone of urgency that made hearts race and heads turn. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into anxious questions. Sundar's instincts kicked in, years of navigating uncertainty guiding his next movements. He crouched slightly, pulling Aaron close, scanning the room for any visible threat, yet finding nothing immediately identifiable. The elderly man, however, remained calm, almost serene, his eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that suggested he could sense the disturbance before it fully materialized. Sundar could not tell whether he felt relief that someone so composed was present or unease that the situation had already become unpredictable. As the tension grew, a young assistant rushed in, her face pale, her voice trembling slightly. She whispered to Modi Ji something that Sundar could not hear, but the reaction was immediate and subtle. Modi Ji's calm composure seemed to tighten into something more alert, more focused. Sundar's pulse quickened. He had faced countless crises in his career, moments of immense pressure where decisions had to be made in seconds, yet nothing had prepared him for this strange collision of innocence, authority, and uncertainty, all in one space. He held Aaron's hand firmly, feeling the boy's small fingers trembling slightly against his, and he realized that whatever was about to happen would not just test his ability to react, it would challenge his capacity to remain composed, kind, and humane under unexpected pressure. The elderly man, sensing the anxiety that rippled through the room, raised a hand in a gesture of calm. His eyes met Sundar's for a brief moment, and in that glance, Sundar felt a strange recognition, a silent reassurance and perhaps a warning. It was as if the man were telling him without words that the moments to follow would be defining, that the choices made now would echo far beyond the walls of the hall, and that resilience and kindness would be more powerful than fear or authority. Sundar felt the weight of the responsibility settle more heavily on his shoulders, yet within that weight he also sensed clarity. Just as the audience began to murmur in confusion and curiosity, The elderly man spoke again, this time addressing the entire hall. His words were slow, deliberate, and full of meaning. Sundar could feel the room hanging on every syllable, as though the air itself had thickened to hold the truth that was about to be revealed. The message was simple, yet profound, touching on themes of respect, courage, and humility. And it was delivered in a way that made every person present feel connected, accountable, and inspired. Sundar felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, not just for what was being said, but for the human capacity to convey depth and kindness, without theatrics, without ceremony, only through sincerity. Yet, as the last words left the man's lips, a new sound cut through the hall. It was low, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew quickly, spreading like ripples through water. A subtle vibration, a movement of something unseen, yet unmistakably present. Sundar's senses heightened. He felt a shiver run down his spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. The audience sensed it too, shifting in their seats, exchanging confused glances. Modiji's eyes narrowed slightly, the calm exterior hiding a mind racing to understand the unexpected. And Sundar realized with a sudden jolt that the moment that had already begun to touch hearts was about to change in a way no one could have predicted. Aaron looked up at him, eyes wide, the innocence of youth meeting the incomprehensible weight of reality. Sundar swallowed hard, knowing that whatever happened next would demand courage not just from leaders, but from the simplest human hearts in the room. He tightened his grip on his son's hand, whispering softly, "Stay with me, no matter what comes next." The words were almost lost in the tension, yet they were enough to anchor both of them, if only briefly. And then, just as Sundar turned toward the source of the vibration, a shadow moved across the back of the hall. Something large, unanticipated, and impossible to ignore. The room held its collective breath, the fragile moment of connection hanging by a thread. Sundar's heart pounded in his chest. He understood, in that instant, that this was more than an interruption. This was the beginning of a test, a challenge that would push everyone present to confront courage, humility, and the unexpected twists of fate in ways that no one could have imagined. The elderly man's eyes followed the shadow, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. Modiji's expression hardened slightly, and Aaron's small hand pressed against Sundar's, trembling. Sundar knew, without a single word spoken, that the next few moments would define not only the event, but a story that would be remembered far beyond this hall. A story that would touch hearts in ways that words alone could never capture. And then, just as the shadow moved closer, something happened that nobody expected. A sudden, inexplicable silence, as if the world itself paused to witness what would come next. The shadow's secret, the shadow moved closer, slow and deliberate. Yet it carried with it an energy that made every heartbeat in the hall accelerate. Sundar's eyes followed the movement, trying to make sense of what he saw, but the shape was ambiguous, almost unreal. The people around him shifted nervously, their murmurs growing louder, a collective tension that seemed to vibrate in the air. Aaron's grip on Sundar's hand tightened, his small fingers digging into the skin as if drawing courage from his father, yet at the same time sharing the boy's own quiet fear. Sundar felt a strange combination of protectiveness and curiosity rising in him. He had faced countless challenges in his life, from complex decisions in the boardroom to navigating technology that changed the world, yet nothing in his experience prepared him for a moment like this, where every sense was heightened, where a shadow could command attention without a word. As the figure emerged from the dim light, the shape slowly resolved into a young man, dressed in plain clothing, unremarkable except for the intensity in his eyes. There was a purpose in his stride, a clarity in the way he moved, that made Sundar instinctively know that this was not a random intrusion. Modiji's calm composure shifted subtly. His eyes narrowed, and his hands moved slightly, a gesture unnoticed by many but noticed by Sundar, who had learned to read quiet signals after years of leadership. The elderly man, still kneeling by Aaron, did not flinch, did not speak, yet his gaze sharpened as if he could sense the story behind the young man even before words were exchanged. Sundar felt a shiver run through him. He knew that events like These rarely unfolded without reason, and that whatever was about to happen carried meaning that might forever alter the memory of this day, not just for him and Aaron, but for everyone in the room. The young man stopped a few feet from the stage, lowering his head slightly in a gesture that was neither threatening nor deferential, but somewhere in between. His eyes scanned the hall, landing on Modiji first, then moving slowly towards Sundar and Aaron. There was something familiar in the way he looked at Arun, a recognition that struck Sundar as both confusing and unsettling. He felt a sudden rush of questions. Who was this young man? How did he know his son? And why, out of all people, did he appear now at this precise moment in this room filled with people who had been waiting for inspiration, not for disruption? Sundar tightened his grip on Aaron's hand, feeling the boy's pulse against his own. Aaron's eyes were wide, but there was a spark of curiosity now, the kind that only children possess before fear fully sets in. Sundar leaned down, whispering softly, "Stay calm, Aaron. Remember what we learned about respect and understanding. We observe first, then we act." Aaron nodded slightly, absorbing his father's words, and Sundar realized that in this moment, he was not just a protector, he was a guide through the unpredictable currents of life. The young man finally spoke, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. He addressed Modiji first, but his words carried an undertone meant for Sundar and the elderly man as well. The words were simple, yet laden with meaning, describing a struggle that was deeply human, a journey of hardship, mistakes, and lessons learned. Sundar listened intently, each sentence striking a chord within him. He felt a mix of empathy, surprise, and concern. The young man spoke not with anger, not with accusation, but with a raw honesty that demanded attention, that reminded everyone present that courage was not just found in achievements, but in the willingness to face one's own truth. As the young man's words unfolded, Sundar noticed something extraordinary. Aaron's small hand began to loosen slightly in his grasp, a sign that the boy was understanding, connecting with the message in a way that transcended fear. Sundar's heart swelled. He realized that his son was witnessing more than a conversation. He was witnessing a lesson in humanity, in resilience, in the power of confronting life with honesty and humility. He had always believed that respect could change hearts, but here, in front of him, it was happening in real time, in the most unexpected way. Yet just as Sundar began to feel a sense of clarity, the situation took an abrupt turn. A loud crash echoed from the back of the hall, startling everyone, sending a ripple of panic through the audience. Papers fluttered to the floor, a microphone toppled, and the subtle tension became palpable fear. Sundar's instincts kicked in. He looked at Modiji, saw a slight gesture of caution, then turned toward Aaron. The boy's eyes were wide now, reflecting uncertainty, and Sundar felt a wave of protectiveness stronger than he had ever known. He knew that the story unfolding before them was no longer just about respect or humility. It was about survival, about resilience under pressure, about making the right choice in the face of chaos. The elderly man rose slowly, placing a gentle hand on Aaron's shoulder. His gaze, full of warmth and authority, met Sundar's, and without speaking, communicated something profound. Trust the moment, trust your instincts, and above all, remember that kindness is stronger than fear. Sundar nodded imperceptibly, absorbing the message. He felt a strange reassurance, as if the presence of this man, calm and grounded, created an invisible shield around them, not from danger, but from the panic that could have easily overwhelmed everyone in the room. Just then, the young man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it up, letting the audience catch a glimpse, though no one could read it fully. Sundar noticed a flicker of recognition in Modiji's eyes, a subtle shift in expression that suggested this paper contained more than words. It carried a story, a secret, a connection that tied all of them together in ways unseen until now. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Every person leaned forward, breathless, waiting for the revelation, sensing that the next moment could transform the ordinary event into something extraordinary, a story that would be remembered for generations. Arun, sensing the importance, straightened instinctively, his small face lit with a mix of pride and fear. Sundar whispered again, barely audible. "Stay strong, Aaron. We face it together." The boy nodded, the weight of understanding settling briefly on his young shoulders. Sundar felt a surge of admiration for him. Children had a way of absorbing meaning that adults often overlooked, and in that instant, Aaron seemed wiser than his years, ready to witness a truth that could inspire countless hearts. And then, as the young man began to speak again, unfolding the paper slowly, the lights flickered, plunging the hall into a momentary darkness. Gasps echoed across the room. Sundar felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The shadow, the sudden noises, the young man's arrival. All of it seemed connected, as if the universe had orchestrated this precise moment to teach them something far beyond expectation. When the lights returned, the young man held the paper, high, revealing the first word written in bold letters, a word that sent a shiver through Sundar's entire body. The hall fell silent once more, everyone frozen in anticipation, waiting for the next revelation that would change everything they thought they knew. And in that moment, Sundar realized the truth. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a test of courage, a reminder of humility, a call to kindness, and a story that would touch hearts across India in ways that no speech, no ceremony, could ever achieve. But before he could take another breath, a sudden movement behind the stage made Sundar spin around. The young man's eyes widened. Aaron gasped, and the elderly man's calm demeanor faltered for just a fraction of a second. Sundar knew with a sinking feeling in his chest that whatever came next would push them all to the edge of fear and faith, testing the bonds of family, courage, and humanity in ways no one in the room would ever forget. The shadow had a secret, and it was about to be revealed. The revelation, the hall felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sundar's heart pounded in a rhythm he could feel in his throat, his palms slightly damp despite the cool air around him. The shadow behind the stage, barely noticeable at first, began to take shape. It was neither threatening nor ordinary. It was a figure that seemed to carry the weight of years, of untold stories, and of silent battles fought in invisible corners of life. Sundar's eyes darted from the figure to Modi Ji, whose expression had shifted from calm authority to sharp awareness, a silent signal that this was no longer a routine event. The young man, the one holding the folded paper, seemed to recognize the shadow as well, his hands trembling ever so slightly, betraying a nervousness that he had hidden until now. The elderly man by Aaron's side remained stoic, yet his eyes hinted at knowledge, a silent acknowledgement that the moment was far more significant than it appeared. Sundar could feel a mix of fear, anticipation, and awe swirling inside him, emotions so intense they made his mind race faster than his body could keep up. Aaron looked up at Sundar, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The boy's wide eyes reflected both curiosity and an unspoken fear, yet there was something remarkable in his demeanor, a child's ability to absorb the weight of reality without letting panic take over. Sundar knelt slightly, lowering his voice. "Aaron, we watch, we listen, we understand first, then we respond." Aaron nodded, and in that small gesture Sundar felt a surge of pride. The boy, young as he was, carried a resilience that mirrored the very essence of what Sundar had tried to teach him. Courage was not absence of fear, it was acting despite fear. The shadow finally stepped into the light, revealing a man in his early 30s. There was an air of quiet desperation around him, but also dignity, the kind that comes from surviving hardship and holding on to principles that many would abandon in easier circumstances. Sundar noticed something strange. The man's eyes were fixed on Aaron, not him, not Modi Ji, but Aaron. It sent a chill down Sundar's spine. Why would a stranger, appearing uninvited in such an important gathering, focus on his child? The elderly man's hand on Aaron's shoulder tightened ever so slightly, a subtle sign of preparation, almost as if he were shielding the boy from invisible tension. Sundar could feel his own chest tighten with protective instinct, but there was also a compelling curiosity, the kind that makes a person confront the unknown instead of fleeing from it. The young man with the paper finally stepped forward, his voice cutting through the heavy air. He began to read aloud what was written, slowly, deliberately, word by word. The content was not what Sundar expected. It was not a demand, not a confession, but a message that spanned generations. It spoke of respect, of lessons learned in silence, of human kindness that could never be quantified, and of opportunities to correct mistakes before they ripened into regret. Sundar felt a lump rise in his throat. Every word resonated with his own journey. The struggle to maintain humility and success, to hold kindness as a core principle in a world that often celebrated power over principle. He looked at Arun, and the boy's eyes were glistening, absorbing every syllable, understanding more than Sundar could have expected. And then, just as the words reached a peak of intensity, the shadow spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of emotion that the room seemed to collectively absorb. He addressed Arun directly, recounting a story that bridged past and present, a story of courage, of human error, and of redemption. Sundar felt his own breath catch. The tale was filled with hardship, with moments where fear and doubt could have destroyed hope. Yet it ended with an unexpected act of kindness that changed the course of someone's life forever. Sundar's mind raced. He realized that this stranger had come not to disrupt, but to teach a lesson that transcended age, status, and position. It was a lesson that even he, as a father and a leader, had only partially understood until this very moment. Aaron's small hand pressed against Sundar's, trembling slightly as he whispered softly, "Papa, why is he telling me this?" Sundar swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "Because," he said gently, "sometimes the world teaches lessons to children that even adults need to learn again. Watch closely, listen carefully, and remember that courage and kindness are stronger than fear." The boy nodded, absorbing the meaning in a way that Sundar could see was almost instinctive. There was a quiet intelligence in children that often surprises adults, the kind that sees beyond appearances into the very heart of a moment. But just as the story seemed to settle, a new disruption occurred. The young man with the paper looked up suddenly, his eyes wide with shock as if he had seen something that nobody else could perceive. The hall, previously tense, now felt electrified with suspense. Sundar followed the young man's gaze, and then he saw it. A small envelope slipped unnoticed into the pocket of the shadow's coat, stamped with the official insignia of an organization that was known for handling matters of great significance. The audience, unaware of the envelope's importance, continued to murmur, but Sundar could feel the shift. His instincts told him that what was inside that envelope could change everything, could rewrite the narrative of the evening, could challenge perceptions, could touch hearts in ways that were unimaginable. Modiji's expression hardened subtly, his hands moving with a quiet precision that only seasoned leaders could manage. The elderly man finally spoke, his voice calm but with undeniable authority. "The truth we face tonight is not just about what is written, it is about what we choose to do with it. Courage is in action, humility in understanding, and kindness in the way we respond." Sundar felt the weight of those words pressing down, not as a burden but as a responsibility that demanded clarity, patience, and resilience. Arun, sensing the gravity of the moment, straightened instinctively. Sundar watched his son, feeling a strange mix of awe and fear. The boy, though small, carried the readiness to face uncertainty with dignity, reflecting a lesson Sundar had tried to instill. That true strength is quiet, thoughtful, and compassionate. Sundar realized that whatever happened next, this moment would define not just their evening, but their understanding of human connection, courage, and integrity. And then, before anyone could react further, the shadow slowly reached for the envelope, hesitated, and finally held it high for the entire hall to see. There was a beat of silence so complete it was almost unbearable. Sundar felt his chest tighten. He knew instinctively that this was the moment when everything would change. The ordinary would become extraordinary. Fear would collide with courage, and the true story, the one that would touch every heart in India, was about to be revealed. Shadow opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, and as he did, a hush fell over the room. Sundar could feel every breath in the hall synchronize. the collective anticipation so heavy it was almost tangible. Arun clutched his father's hand, Sundar's own grip tightening in response, and in that moment, Sundar understood the truth. The next few minutes would define not just an event, but a legacy, a memory, and a story of resilience, humility, and human kindness that would be remembered forever. And then, the contents of the envelope were revealed. A revelation so unexpected, so profoundly human, that it threatened to change the way everyone in the hall understood life, courage, and respect. The room held its breath. Sundar felt a shiver run down his spine, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause. The moment of truth, the hall was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and made every heartbeat sound like a drum in the chest. Sundar felt his palms sweat, his fingers tightening, around Arun's hand. The envelope in the shadow's hand seemed to hold the weight of the world, not just a piece of paper, but a story, a revelation, a key to something far beyond ordinary understanding. The audience leaned forward instinctively, sensing that what was about to unfold would alter their perception of life, courage, and the human heart itself. Sundar could feel the energy shifting, a subtle vibration in the air that made him aware of every movement, every breath, every unspoken thought around him. Arun looked up at him, eyes wide with anticipation, a mixture of fear and curiosity reflecting the innocence of a child facing something profoundly serious for the first time. The shadow opened the envelope slowly, with deliberate care, as if the act itself was a ritual. Sundar noticed that even Modiji's expression softened slightly, a rare break in his otherwise composed demeanor, revealing the gravity of the moment. The contents of the envelope were simple, a folded photograph slightly worn at the edges, accompanied by a short handwritten note. Yet the simplicity was deceptive. Sundar felt a shiver run through him as he recognized the image. It was a photograph of a young boy, not much older than Aaron, standing with a small, timid smile in front of a humble school, surrounded by children who radiated joy despite obvious hardship. Sundar looked closer and realized the boy in the photograph was the young man holding the envelope, only years younger. The connection between the past and the present hit Sundar with full force. The handwritten note read like a confession, a story, and a plea all at once. It told of a boy who had once faced immense struggle, of moments where fear and doubt had nearly destroyed his spirit, and of the kindness extended by strangers that had changed his path. It spoke of resilience, of how simple gestures, an encouraging word, a helping hand, a patient mentor, could alter the trajectory of a life. Sundar felt tears sting his eyes, not just for the boy in the photograph, but for Aaron, for himself, and for every person present. He realized that this was not just a story about success or recognition. It was a story about the human heart, about the ripple effect of kindness and courage that could span generations. Aaron, sensing the importance of the moment, pressed closer to Sundar. His voice, small but clear, whispered, "Papa, did he have help?" Sundar nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Aaron. Sometimes people need someone to believe in them, even when they cannot believe in themselves. And sometimes that belief changes everything." Aaron's eyes reflected understanding beyond his years. Sundar felt a surge of pride mixed with awe. He had always believed in the power of mentorship, humility, and patience. But here the truth of those beliefs was unfolding before him in real time, tangible and undeniable. The shadow continued, his voice steady now but carrying layers of emotion that seemed to penetrate every corner of the hall. He recounted how the young boy in the photograph had faced rejection, despair, and moments of hopelessness. Yet someone had extended kindness, had shown patience, had lifted him when he fell. It was a story so universal that Sundar felt every person in the room resonating with it. The young man spoke not to accuse, not to boast, but to inspire, to remind everyone that humility and compassion were not abstract ideas. They were acts, choices made in quiet, ordinary moments that could shape extraordinary futures. Sundar looked at Modiji, whose calm presence had been a steady anchor throughout the unfolding drama. The Prime Minister's eyes held warmth now, a soft acknowledgement of the story's power. Sundar felt the subtle weight of responsibility settle on him. He had always tried to lead with empathy, to nurture innovation and courage. But this moment reminded him that leadership was also about example, about the way kindness could cascade through lives. He glanced at Aaron, feeling the boy's tiny hand squeeze his own, a gesture that said more than words ever could. In that simple grasp was trust, hope, and the quiet determination to face the world with integrity. And then, just as the hall seemed to absorb the story fully, a sudden, unexpected twist unfolded. The photograph contained a second, almost hidden, detail. A note tucked behind the first, barely visible, addressed to Sundar himself. Sundar's breath caught as he unfolded it. The words were simple but devastatingly poignant. Your actions today, small or large, ripple farther than you see. Watch carefully what your son learns here, for he will carry the torch of kindness and courage. Sundar felt a wave of emotion crash over him. It was not just a message about the young man's past, it was a reflection of the responsibility and influence he carried as a father and a leader. He realized, in a way that felt both terrifying and beautiful, that this moment was as much about Aaron as it was about anyone else.